Okay, let's see here. We got that. There we go. Oops. All right, I'll be right back with you, Mumbo Room.
Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it's a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalai. I'm your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. This week has been absolutely insane for us here at Altispeed Technologies. We have been working our butts off, man. It's been absolutely unbelievable. You know, summertime's always our busiest time. That's why you'll notice a lot of thought and planning and changes go into the program around that December, January area, because that's kind of our slow time. Well, summertime is anything but slow. It has literally gotten to the point that I can't even go out to eat for lunch without having a side conversation with a client. And that's not me complaining. I'm not whining about it. I'm happy about it. I'm happy to be that busy. I'm happy for the opportunity to serve other people. I'm happy that I can help enough people get what they want in life so that they'll pay me to get what I want in life. So this is not me complaining. And as I've said numerous times on the show, I really think that Altispeed Technologies and the Ask Noah show really have a unique relationship. They're joined at the hip in a lot of ways, primarily because a lot of the problems and things that I see in the field give me an opportunity of something to talk about on the show. And it gives me an opportunity to enlighten you guys on the show. So this last week, one of the things that we've been doing a ton of managed Wi-Fi and managed network services. And coming out, they're actually, my team is still working on hammering out the final actual release. You guys are finding out before our customers find out. But starting January of next year, we won't support or install unmanaged switches. And part of that is because it is very difficult to track down and troubleshoot problems when they occur. But the other thing is, and the more important thing is, we just see a lot more VLANs going into production. VLANs for voice, VLANs for regular data, VLANs for guest data, these kinds of things. And it's really gotten to a point where we just sat down, we started looking at the price of managed switches, and we're like, listen, man, you can pick up a managed switch so ridiculously cheap. We're talking like $35-40. Now, it's not a full managed switch, but it's enough to recognize VLANs, do some trunk ports and stuff like that. There's enough of these things that are out there, and the prices come down enough that at this point we think it's time to move forward. So we started testing some less expensive managed switches. Now, I grew up in a Cisco world. Went to school for Cisco, learned Cisco. I know iOS like the back of my hand. I can sit down at an iOS device and I feel almost as comfortable as I do at a Linux terminal. Now, a couple of years ago on the Linux Action Show, we actually did an interview with a company that was talking about how network engineers and system administrators are going to meet in the middle. Because what they are finding is it is too expensive to pay somebody to go to school to become a network engineer and then pay somebody else to go to school to become a network administrator or a systems administrator, when the reality is that there are newer and better devices that are shipping that are their white box label stuff, and they contain Linux as the operating system, is using Linux as an open source routing and switching platform. Now, this is what Facebook is going to. This is what Google is going to. So there is a lot of industry momentum behind this, and they have put a lot of thought into the physical design of these devices, so they are very powerful switches, very capable switches, and they're built for redundancy. And so as we have watched those two things collide, we have watched Cisco drop significantly in the switch world, in the router world. Now, a lot of you know that Altispeed Technologies, we don't install Cisco equipment. We install Microtex for routers. And we haven't really talked a whole lot about switches. We typically stay with HPs. So HP 1910s are real popular. 1920s are real popular. Did a lot of 1810s this week. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I will be the first one to say that if you actually look at the specifications issued by HP, Cisco, you compare all the switches, Dell, Juniper, I mean, just name it. What you'll find is that HP's silicon won't actually perform at the level that HP claims it will. And so they don't meet their own specification. And so because of that, there are certain applications, certain environments, certain industries that you actually can't use those less expensive switches. You have to use a true Cisco switch. Now, like a Cisco, I don't know, what's a good Cisco model? 2960, somewhere in there. If you're looking at a brand new Cisco switch, you can probably expect to pay, upwards of $2,000, I suppose, for well, maybe upwards of $1,500 for a 2960 switch. So that's a very expensive investment. Whereas the HP, like a V1810 sells brand new on Amazon for $180, somewhere in that neighborhood. And I would consider the HPs to be a carrier-grade network switch. But I was having a discussion with a good friend of mine. We were talking about switches. And a lot of you have asked me, not necessarily on the air, I've never taken the question on the air, but people have called in and talked to me or chatted on Telegram or email, or I've run into them in person. They'll say, no, why don't you ever talk about the Ubiquiti USG or the Ubiquiti switches? I hear you talk so highly about the UAP AC Pros. You talk so highly about their access points. You never talk about their switches and their routers. Why is that? Well, the truth is, I don't like Ubiquiti switches, and I don't like Ubiquiti routers. And if you have one, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with you or there's nothing wrong with them. We can still be friends. But there is something to be said about having console access to the device when everything goes wrong. So I want to dive into that a little bit because we have been dealing with this and we've been testing the heck out of these things. So we ordered a number of different switches and put them all in what we call the sandbox. The sandbox is just a room here at Altispeed Technologies. It's actually not far from the studio that I'm sitting in, and it's just a big room with four 6-foot tables on it, and we have a couple of 10 gig feeds that feed from our WAN switch, and then we just have a bunch of routers and switches and computers and cables and space to just kind of try things out. And so we can simulate environments, we can set up an entire, we can duplicate an entire setup if we have to test it or try something, and we can do that in our sandbox. And so the last week and a half, the sandbox has been dedicated to a very, very large project that we're working on. And basically what we're doing is replacing network infrastructure, and we've broken it up in the project into sub-projects. And every 2 weeks, we're trying to replace another section of their network. And so we're building it out in the sandbox, moving it in, building it in the sandbox, moving it in, and configuring all the devices that way. And so as we were going through and testing some of these things, we found a lot of things out about these cheaper switches. So the first thing is with the edge switches, they have an actually can SSH into them, which is good. We still haven't found a way to console into them, but they have SSH access. So there's a way to configure the switch on the device itself. But with the lower end Ubiquiti stuff, if you buy like the 8-port, just the 8-port managed switch, or even the 8-port managed switch that has PoE for the UniFi APs, the only way to manage that device is through the UniFi controller. Now, when it comes to access points, I understand if you've got 500 of them, why you would just expect the controller to be online. But let me tell you something. There is nothing more frustrating when you're trying to troubleshoot a VLAN, or you've lost connectivity to an entire switch or maybe even an entire rack, and you're trying to step through that process, and I can't even log into the switch to find out what the config is showing because it can't talk to the controller for some stupid reason. That is an unacceptable way to manage a switch, in my opinion. And so up until now, I haven't had anything concrete except my humble suspicions, having worked in this industry for 15 years, that the UniFi switches, while they're good products, are really more of a prosumer thing, not really a carrier-grade, professional, commercial, enterprise-grade switch. And now I have concrete evidence to back that up. I have 4 of them sitting inside of our sandbox right now. We've set all of them up a different way, configured them all differently, and run into a number of problems with them. So the management is that's the first issue I have, is that I can't console into it. I need to be able to plug a serial cable in or USB cable, open Minicom, and be able to see what that switch's config is. The second issue we've run into is, for some idiotic reason, Ubiquiti blocks you from sending VLAN 1 basically over anywhere else. And the issue with that is, the reason that I care about VLAN 1 is, so if you're not familiar, a lot of people use VLAN 1 as their administrative LAN, and you really shouldn't, because the problem with VLAN 1 is that you can't delete it, and it's always the management VLAN by default on every device. And so there's a lot of common wisdom that just says, do not ever use VLAN 1. So a lot of places, when they pull the switch in, they'll assign like a management VLAN of 10, and they just don't use VLAN 1. On the other hand, though, we do have a lot of clients that's their infrastructure, and we can't go, like this particular place, I'm not going to 6 different floors, 3 switches per rack, 4 racks per floor. We're not reconfiguring every one of those switches for an entirely different VLAN. And then there's all these devices, endpoint devices, access points and stuff that are all expecting VLAN 1. We just have to be able to pass VLAN 1 up through the network stack, because that's the infrastructure that we inherited. Would we set that up if we were doing it from scratch? No, but that's what we inherited, so that's what we're doing. And so Ubiquiti's inability to pass VLAN 1 through, or to be able to separate it out, I shouldn't say it won't pass it through, because you can set the inside of the trunk port to all, so you can pass all of the networks through, but you can't separate that VLAN 1 out. And that is proving to be a huge problem for us. So anyway, I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. Certainly don't want to dedicate a whole show to talking about switches or VLANs or anything like that. But suffice to say, if there's anybody out there that was ever wondering, why don't I ever hear the Ask Noah show? Why don't they ever talk about the UniFi switches or the USGs? They always talk about the access points. That's why. They are not a enterprise grade switch. They're a prosumer device that's really intended for a small to medium business that wants to do a lot of their networking in-house, needs more power than the little dumb 5-port switch at OfficeMax will provide you, and can't do much more. But in that category, I have a small office. I want to mirror some ports, or I want to do some VLANing, this, that, or the other. We have a better suggestion for you. We have a switch. I'm pulling it up here. It is the TP-Link, and what this TP-Link does, and why I like it, is it is a managed switch, so you can't do a lot of really advanced stuff on it, but basic things like mirroring a port and doing VLANs and stuff like that, it will work. $37. We'll have a link for you in the show notes. This thing is absolutely fantastic. And so this is what we would recommend if you're interested in this is what we would recommend. This is what I recommend if you're interested in a managed switch, or if you have a small little office. We'll take a look at this. And I just went to pull up a phone call, and I saw that our caller dropped. So if that caller is still there, just give me a call back, and we'll get you on the air right away. Again, phone lines are open this hour, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I wanted to, or actually, I guess it was just last week, I wanted to follow up on a call that we took. We took a call where a gentleman was asking about the best way to deal with a remote desktop solution where they were transitioning from an all Windows environment to an all Linux environment. And he outlined the way that they were using RDP, and he wanted to know, how can I replicate that process as simply as possible in Linux. And we had made a number of different suggestions. We had talked about XRDP, we had talked about X2Go, and none of them really quite fit his use case, but I think he sounded like a savvy enough guy that I think he was going to figure something out based on the information we gave him. Well, one of the gentlemen it was either the chat room or email or Telegram somewhere had followed up with me. Oh, it was on the Reddit. Followed up with me on reddit.com/r/asknoah show and said, hey, for that gentleman that wrote in and said that he wanted a remote desktop solution that would work very well on Linux, tell him to check out NoMachine. Now, I don't know a whole lot about NoMachine, so I can't put my name behind it and say, yep, this is what we absolutely recommend. But I've spent just a couple of minutes looking at it, looking through the website. I watched a couple of videos on setting it up. Looks pretty cool. The only real downside I could find to it is that it's proprietary. But other than that, it looks like a really solid system. And so we're going to, the Ask Noah Show, we're going to check this NoMachine out. We're going to take a look at it. We're going to see how it works. And we'll report back to you. Chat room's giving me a hard time. But yeah, so we're going to check that out and talk back to you. But if that caller is out there and is saying, hey, I just wanted an update on what would work well for me, that's what we'd recommend. Check out NoMachine. Let me know what you think, because it sounds like it will meet all of your requirements. Let's go to the phones again. 855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email live at AskNoahShow.com. Tom from Detroit. Hey, Tom. Welcome to the Ask Noah Show. Oops. Turns out I have to push the button, Tom. I'm sorry. Hey, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
That's all right. Hi, Noah. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. How can we help?
Well, it's actually pretty apropos with the first part of the show that you were talking about. I've been toying with pfSense for a couple years now, and got myself a decently powered server, at least for myself, as my first server. And really, the what should I say? The muse of virtualization is calling me, and was just wondering if you had any thoughts, one, on pfSense in general, but two, I look online about putting your firewall, your edge firewall in a virtual machine and problems with that. As everything, you see arguments either way. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah, actually, so the truth, Tom, is that a lot of people are doing this. A lot of people are going this direction. So there are a number of different options out there. Obviously, there is things like, is it Sophos? S-O-P-H-O-S, I think is how you pronounce it. There's Untangle.
Yes, I've heard of that one.
Yep. So there's a bunch of these software-based solutions. In fact, there's one, and I'm intentionally not going to mention it on the air because we're in cahoots with the developer, and let's just say something really cool might be happening on the Ask Noah Show, and I don't want to blow that. But there's another one that's out there that's pretty good too. Router OS you actually will run on an x64 platform, so you can actually virtualize the microtext that we install and run that exact same software inside of a virtual machine. Now, there is a lot of advantages to that. The first being that you don't have to dedicate one piece of hardware to that, so you can have one physical server, and that is virtualizing a bunch of different utilities for you. So it's running your router, which you really don't need to dedicate an entire machine to. Maybe it's running like a media server or something like that. And you can bundle all of these things up and stick them inside of a single box. Now, when you do that, Tom, one of the things that you have to pay attention to is you need to allocate enough bandwidth on the physical devices so that you don't slow down, you don't bottleneck your own network, right? So for example, I'll give you an example. So if you have a virtual server and let's say you have a single 1 gig network jack on that back of that server, right? Your bottleneck, your bandwidth for all the traffic that comes in or out of your network, plus all of the traffic that is leaving any of those virtual guests, has to funnel down into a single 1 gig connection. Right? So you want to pay attention to that. And so for example, if it was me, if I'm doing that, I'm buying like a Dell R710 somewhere in there where I have a couple of NICs on the back of the server, and I can dedicate one of those for my LAN or one of those for the WAN connection for the router. And then, maybe I dedicate one for the LAN, and then I dedicate one for the other servers that are connecting through there. But one of those ports I'd probably pass directly through to my router, and whatever you're going to run on there is fine. But yeah, virtualizing firewalls. Sorry, go ahead.
Right, that's why I was thinking about it, because I have the one built-in NIC that came on the machine, but also have a quad port. And I do have, I know you were just not talking great about them, but I have a UniFi switch that handles LACP, and really it's kind of what calls me to it is the one built-in for the WAN, and then doing an LACP bond out to the switch with the other four. And then, of course, with all the virtual machines that I have on the box itself, you have the virtual bridge that you can, really get some high speed through there because you're not relying on copper. So that's kind of what had me thinking about it and really kind of toying with the idea. So
yeah, absolutely. And I don't mean to beat up too hard on UniFi switches. They're great devices as long as you understand what you're getting. Sounds like for the environment that you're using, more than enough, right? It's when you start to stack 30 of them or 40 of them into a building, and somebody makes a change on a VLAN, and all of a sudden you lose access to the management VLAN on 30 of the 40 switches, and you don't know exactly where that problem is, and now you can't log into 30 of those switches to see how they're even configured or where they're passing traffic or where the problem is, right? In my world, it gets a little bit different.
Yeah, right. No, I just have the one in my basement, so it's good for my needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me ask too, if you don't mind, is it an edge switch or is it one of the little 8-port jobbies?
It's the rack mount, the UniFi 16,
okay.
150 watt model. So I can use it for PoE for, I have a couple of APs around. So.
Okay, so I was just looking up that one. I believe that one is an edge device, right? It's an edge switch. I'm pretty sure the 16-port one is.
Actually, yeah, you're right. Good call on that.
So here's the great thing about that. That one actually does have an interface into it. Now, it's not a true console interface as far as I'm aware. You still are SSHing in, so I mean, it requires that you didn't muck up the IP address that's managed or that's assigned to the switch. But at least I can plug a cable into it and log into the device itself. It doesn't have to talk out to, in our case, our controller is on the quote unquote cloud. It sits in our data center here at Altispeed. But if the client loses access out to the internet, then everything will continue to function the way it is currently programmed, but I can't push new configuration to it. And that is what makes me nervous. And even if they have an on-site controller, it presupposes that everything is functioning right on the network and everything is configured correctly on the network for those network devices to talk out to the controller, even if it's co-located. So for those reasons, I'm not a big fan of it. But yeah, absolutely. Go ahead and virtualize. And, Tom, if you're interested, I can add you to, there's a small group that we have where we talk about like home lab type things and building servers in your home and different projects. And a lot of those guys are virtualizing routers and stuff like that. If you like, I can put you back on hold. I can get your information and I can see about getting you an invitation to that group.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. I'll put you back on hold, and Sarah can pick up and take your information, and we'll get back to you on that. And yeah, no, I said this once before. I'll say it again. Home servers are the next upcoming thing. We have done more home server installs, home server based things in 2018 than I think we've done in the last 10 years that we've been running Altispeed Technologies. I mean, it's gone just boom, boom. It's just crazy. And that's a good thing. I think people are paying attention to privacy. I think people are paying attention to security. I think that subscription models are starting to die off because people are looking up and they're going, man, I'm spending X amount of dollars every single month on subscriptions to things. I'd rather just host them myself. And oftentimes that leads to a somewhat comical discussion. You know, when you're sitting there with the ISP company and we're doing the network, and you've got a guy saying, well, I want to install that Kodi box where I can get the free TV shows. And, you know, the ISP is sitting there going, you can't really do that. That's pirating and it's technically illegal. And, you know, then I'm sitting here and I'm like, hey, listen, who are we to judge? We're just here to install the technology. You know, they want a Kodi box. Kodi's good for a lot of other things other than, you know, just the illegal part of it. You know, I'm going to install it. But yeah, no, I think that is, I think virtualizing a router is a great idea. I think virtualizing almost everything is a great idea. The only thing I don't support virtualizing, and I had an in-depth discussion with this with Alan Jude when he was here, is don't virtualize FreeNAS. Virtualize ZFS all you want, but don't virtualize FreeNAS. FreeNAS wants to be able to talk directly to the hard drives. And so when you do that, when you virtualize FreeNAS, you eliminate the ability for FreeNAS to directly to have complete control over those physical devices. And so, as Alan was telling me, if FreeNAS decides to do a flush, all of those other virtual guests that are sitting on top of that host, they're all affected, even if you pass the disk controller through. So you'd want to have a separate storage array. Now, what you could do, and what we have done, is you could set up a system in such a way where you have a NAS storage device, and then you connect that NAS storage device to FreeNAS. So that's a way to do it. You could have like an eSATA enclosure or something like that, and connect that and pass that enclosure, that hard drive system, directly through to FreeNAS. That's one way to do it. But don't virtualize FreeNAS. Kevin is calling from Pittsburgh. Hey, Kevin, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir. Thanks for calling in. How can we help?
My question. So my daughter wears a glucose sensor made by Dexcom. It's a Dexcom G5.
Okay.
And what that allows her to do, instead of pricking her finger like 10 times a day to get a glucose reading, it will take a glucose reading every 5 minutes and send it to a phone via Bluetooth.
Okay.
And then that allows, there's a sharing app, so she can be anywhere, and it can share it back to my phone and my wife's phone, so we can always keep track of what her glucose level is. But she's 9,
Gotcha.
and I was wondering if there's some type of Bluetooth repeater or extender that we could set up, like in the house or the yard, because it's limited to, the phone has to be within, Bluetooth range of that sensor.
Sure.
She wears a little strap and carries it on her waist, but, in the summertime and stuff, it'd be great if she wasn't tied to that.
Okay, I got you. So walk me through this a little bit. The meter itself directly communicates with the phone, or there's an intermediary device?
No, it either communicates directly via Bluetooth to the phone. There's an app called Dexcom Share. And then, or there's a little receiver that she can carry around also, but that just, you can't share it out. So it only communicates to that receiver, and that's it. So I have it paired to a phone for her, and it'll read on there. That'll act as the receiver for the glucose sensor. But that just means she has to have that with her.
I got you.
When she's out in the yard on the swing set or anywhere, it has to be within so many feet to work.
I got you. So we want to get her away from having the phone. It's not a function of you don't want to have the phone. It's you want to get her away from, you don't want to have her carrying the phone all the time.
Right. Just while she's at home anyway, when she's at school or wherever, it just, like I said, she wears it on a little fanny pack and it works great, but we just don't want to have her have that thing attached to her all summer long, and it's a wonderful device. So we'd like to see if we could get something Bluetooth that would emulate the phone and just, like Wi-Fi in the house does.
Yeah, I got you. So the first thing is I would keep my mind out, or I'd keep my eye out for as these things become more advanced. Not sure if you're aware, but my dad is a cardiologist, and so oftentimes I'm privy to see what is coming down the pipe, not so much in the diabetic world, but certainly in the cardiac world. And it seems like every couple of months there's a lot of money to make cooler and cooler stuff. So it would not surprise me if in the next year, maybe even now, if the next meter doesn't actually come with something like a built-in LTE modem or a built-in Wi-Fi, something like that, right? So that's the first thing I would say, is just keep a eye out for that. Now, the only thing that I'm aware of that does what you're talking about is a device called it's called an SMA Bluetooth repeater. And I'll have a link for you in the show notes, and I'm not 100%. I just did a search through our company database where we install different products for Bluetooth, just to see what Bluetooth devices we've installed. And this is one of the devices we've installed. I don't know a ton about it other than the fact that it is called a Bluetooth repeater. So I would assume,
Okay.
yeah. And so it I'll look into more of exactly what this device does and if it would solve it for you. And of course, I'll have a link for you in the show notes. And I will keep my eye out. And if I come across something that would definitely work for you or would solve that problem, is it all right if we take down your phone number and that way we can get that information back to you?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot, Kevin. I really appreciate it. I'll put you back on hold. We'll see if Sarah can grab your contact as well. We're keeping Sarah busy this hour, I tell you what. Again, phone lines are open, 855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. Now, I want to go back to an email that I got just a couple of weeks ago. We talked about Chromebooks on this show, and I asked the question, if we get to a point where Google Chrome OS is as close as we ever get to desktop Linux, is that acceptable to you? And a gentleman wrote to me, very carefully worded, very well thought out response, and he said, "Hey, hello, Noah. I'm writing to you in response to a question on the episode of Ask Noah Show. You brought up the whole thing of Google making Chromebooks into actual Linux machines, and the step after that possibly being Google could make Linux popular, but that would mean that we'd have to swallow a big pill. Well, let me set this as a ground rule for you. Google can stay the heck out of my kernel. Google can stay the heck out of my machine. Your machine, our systems, or those systems that we build to our specifications. I am terrified that someday we will live in the now Apple or Microsoft world of Linux. You don't own that. It isn't yours, but you can use it until we don't want you to. Nothing gives me the feeling of dread more than this. And to be clear, I'm an outlier. I dream of a Debian or Arch-based phone. I want to run Linux on everything. I want to run games, and I want them to run locally and not in a Windows VM. I want to use AMD GPU with my RX 580 or Vega 8 laptop and be able to contribute to a bug list to better the system that I love to use. Ubuntu Phone, as far as I know, is the closest thing that we've ever had for phones, but for everything else, I can do that. Linux allows us to do that, but I fear that someday Linux will just be the new Mac OS. And I know somebody is going to say, but my GNU/Linux GPL license says otherwise, but trust me, big companies give very little amounts of crap about license infraction, or anything really. They will modify it to their way to get control, and let's be honest, this is the way the American economy works if you pay attention. So for me, I won't swallow that pill. I'll keep running Void Linux and Slackware to ensure control over something that I own. I will continue to use something that I bought for my own way, and if we allow some of this crap to slip at all, then we'll get the rug pulled out from under us as fast as possible. We've seen it before and we'll see it again, if not with Linux, with something else as usual. Although there is one time a Microsoft executive tried to buy Linux, I believe the comment was something to akin, if they're a competitor, we can just buy them out and they aren't a problem. If I can find a reference to that, I'll send it along. But it was during the Windows 95 and 98 days, and look at us now. We're doing everything right, and MS is bleeding developers right and left. No wonder they're diving for Linux devs. Some Apple and ARM infrastructure, they have to run Mac OS and Linux perfectly. It'll be the only way to keep their users as far as they can tell. Because to keep the city companies out of my small town systems, our quiet little village can be popular in growth without corruption or perversion, thank you very much. And if Linux gets screwed, well, I'm going to Amiga Systems and I'll watch all you guys die in a fire. Not my problem to fix at that point. Dahmer. Now, the thing is, I don't agree with everything that Dahmer said in that particular email, but I think that he took a lot of time to articulate his points well, and I think that the vast majority of you, if you're listening to this program, if you're listening to me behind a microphone, then you care about owning your own technology, and you know that was somewhat of a rhetorical question, and you know darn well that I'm not using a Chromebook as my everyday laptop. I'll try it for a week just to see how it works, but come on, I mean, I think we all know where I'm going with that. Well, I have gotten to know Dahmer over the past couple of days, and joining me on the program is Mr. Dahmer. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hello.
Hey, glad to have you. So the reason I wanted to bring Dahmer onto the show is we got into a very interesting, deep discussion on the current status of laptops. And Dahmer, you have a unique perspective on what should be the new standard.
Yeah, so where exactly should I start with that?
Well, let me ask you this. I think there's a large portion of the audience that would say, I should be able to go into Best Buy and spend $200 or $300 and get a 500 gig, 5200 RPM drive, and with 4 gigs of RAM and a 1366 by 768 display and a plastic housing. And I would say that's pretty typical of the run-of-the-mill laptop that you find most people with, and most people would say that's good enough. Do you agree with that?
No, but only because I probably have a very skewed perspective on what hardware should be.
What gave you that skewed perspective?
Well, for a couple of years now, probably since, like, I don't know, 2007, maybe, I've kind of always had access to workstation type laptops. Now, my first laptop that I had was kind of crappy little Dell Inspiron B120, and it ran like crap, but all it did was write papers. After that, I ended up with something along the lines of a desktop replacement, and kind of have had that since, and maybe that skews the perspective a little bit, but it was the fact that it was, unlimited power in such a small package, but I kind of think that laptops shouldn't be quote-unquote netbooks, as I call them.
Okay.
More capable than...
Sure, you think that they should pack some power in that.
More capable than an Atom.
No, that makes sense. So let me ask you this. Is it just about power for you? Is it just about, cramming an i7 in there and 16 gigs of RAM and, and a quad-core processor? Or does build quality play into that? Does resolution play into that?
Again, subjective. I have eye problems, so to be honest, 1366 by 768, perfectly fine for me. I can actually see everything on the screen. I think it's kind of silly that we have laptops that are 14 or 15 inch with 4K screens now. That's just me. I also like to have full resolution on my display, so, you got that skew. But an i7, maybe not so much. Not for everyone. You have that old thing where all the gamers want i7s, but, they need i3s at most, right? Because they're going to... The old meme of, I'm going to buy a workstation, I'm going to buy a Mac Pro to play Minecraft on. That old joke.
Right.
But I think the standard at least should be something along the lines of 4 cores, maybe 4 threads, maybe 8 threads. I don't have a clear opinion on that, really. But something more than the same kind of technology we saw from Core 2 Duo laptops from 2009.
Yeah, it's interesting, Dumber, because we have not seen a lot of advancement in laptops in the last couple of years, right? We put a new rev number at the end of the processor, and but the clock speed isn't climbing drastically, and what the processor is capable of is not climbing drastically. Certainly, a processor today is better than the processor of yesterday, is better than the processor of 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But the reality is, we are not seeing sweeping new changes every time we release a new processor, as we were maybe 15, 16 years ago. When we went from the Core 2 Duo series, to the i series, there was a serious performance increase, and there was also a serious power consumption decrease when you look inside of between like the 4th gen, like a 4th gen i5 and a 3rd gen i5 or a 2nd gen i5, you notice that the power consumption is just ridiculously crazy. And we see that when we're bidding out systems and they say, yeah, we need to upgrade these particular systems because they're just drawing too much power. They're costing too much money. And so that's been an interesting thing to follow. But what I gathered from talking for you from the past couple of days is that you won't settle for a Chromebook.
Right. I think the best answer for me at the moment, and I have a poll that I can even link you to. I'm active on the Level 1 text forums, and so we've kind of had conversations like this every once in a while, and I'm actually looking at buying a new laptop. And I kind of looked at what I was going to look at, and I could actually get a rather nice Chromebook. What was it, the Acer C720 when that came out?
Yes.
No, one of the Acer ones were absolutely ridiculously spec'd and could play. I'm losing names now. Skyrim when it was out was like, oh my god, you can't run that on anything. And then a couple of years later, there it is on this tiny little netbook thing. So I could. It wouldn't be a problem, but it would drive me insane.
Well, Well, let me ask you this, Dahmer. So the chat room is pointing something interesting out. So they're talking about with the advent of Thunderbolt, direct access to the PCI bus. Do we still need really, really powerful laptops, or is it okay to have maybe a slightly less powerful laptop, but have a lot of powerful components connected inside of some sort of a Thunderbolt 3 dock that we then access when we're sitting down to play a game? So when I'm on the road and I'm just checking my email, browsing YouTube, maybe watching a couple videos for entertainment or reading, some ebooks, for that, I just integrated graphics is fine. Not a ton of outboard processing is fine. But then when I sit down and I want to be connected to two 4K monitors, and I want to do some video editing and stuff like that, well, now I need a trackball and I need a special keyboard and I need the external graphics card, stuff like that. Do you think there's some merit to that, or is that would you totally not consider that?
I mean, I have considered it. While I've been looking at laptops, I've been looking at laptops for probably the last 6 months. I have considered that. I went to System 76 and asked, hey, I would rather not have a NVIDIA card in my laptop, and maybe I don't want to game while I'm on the bus or something, while I'm going to work or something. But I kind of like to have a GPU, so is there any outlooks that, like, maybe we'll get Ryzen APUs? I don't know. And I didn't really get much of a response other than, well, we're looking into it. And no, I don't think, everyone has to have a 1060 or a 1080 or something in their laptop. Absolutely not. I think the best example for that, and maybe between 1 and 2 of the laptops I'm looking at buying for myself, should be pretty much oh my god, AMD EPYC in a laptop. That'd be horrible. I think the best standard that we should have for a normal laptop is the HP X360 15Z. It's got a 2500U in it, and a Ryzen 2500U. It's got a nice touchscreen. It's got a decent handling of RAM. It can go up to 32 gigs of RAM for something that, you wouldn't otherwise think, hey, that could be a workstation. Mm-hmm. It's got a nice keyboard. It's backlit. Can do NVMe. I think that should be the average standard of really anyone around. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I think, we saw a lot of 2-in-1s come out, and everyone was like, that's going to be the future, and now we've kind of gone to something that's more designed like a phone, which I call a netbook, really. A simple i5 or a simple i7 that's 2 cores, underpowered, is probably not worth the $1,200 that we pay for. MacBook. But, it just seems like we don't have the firepower that we were really expecting to have a couple years ago.
It's interesting.
It seems like we're becoming less capable than what we should.
It's interesting because you're not the first person to bring this up, right? Linus Torvalds himself has talked about how underpowered and underwhelmed he is with the current standard of laptop and how that needs to change. And it was one of the reasons that he was one of the first users of the original Chromebook Pixel. It was one of the reasons that he was a MacBook Air user for a while, is because he wants really high-end hardware, and that is difficult to find. Now, I would agree with you that I think that you can, especially today, if the argument was never true before, it is certainly true today that you can buy a lot more better performing hardware from alternate vendors other than Apple. The only reason you buy a MacBook is if you want to use their garbage dumpster of an operating system because you can't figure out how to use other software. If that's your work case, then I guess you're stuck with a Mac. Other than that, there's always going to be a better option, and I'll give everybody out there a guarantee. If you watch, when is WWDC coming up? It's like June 4th, right? Date 2018. I try and half paid. Yeah, June 4th through 8th. So it's coming up in just a couple of weeks. So we'll find out in 2 weeks. I'll bet you you'll see a couple of things. You'll definitely, well, this isn't really a secret, I'm not guessing here, but they have talked about how they're going to be working on cross-platform applications. So they're trying to bring iOS applications over to the Mac. I'll bet you see very little, if any, iteration on their MacBook, on the Mac Pro, on the iMac Pro, on stuff like that. They want to move that customer base over to iOS. I guarantee it, because that's where their money is, that's where their incentive is, that's where their customer base is, and that's notoriously where they have done very, very well. If you are in charge of making money for Apple, that's the play you make. That's how you make a lot of money. As for Linux users, we should look at that as a massive opportunity to grab some of these developers that up till now have been tolerating macOS and bring them over to Linux. Hey, Dahmer, I want to thank you for taking some time to come on the show and share your opinions with us. People want to check out more of what you're doing, and let me ask you something before I let you go. What are your top contenders for a laptop?
If you give me a sec, I can even pull up the poll.
Yeah, we can do that. Oh, you have a poll
that
going.
I have. Yeah, on the Level 1 text forums.
Okay.
Basically, every time that I'm looking at something that's like, I don't know exactly what to say for, what I want to do, then I just throw it out to there, and the lounge from there kind of trolls around for a little bit and kind of makes some jokes, and then the actual serious people come in and have rational opinions.
Sure.
Yeah, it's just, at this point, it's a choice of 4 laptops, the HP Envy X360, as I said earlier.
Okay.
And then 3 that I may or may not kind of judge for what they are. So there's an HP Omen out there with a 7700 HQ and an RX 580, which I'm very interested in because it's one of few laptops with an AMD GPU, next to the Envy, of course. The new 6-core Oryx Pro, which I'm not keen on because, frankly, I think it's kind of a spit in the face for a Linux company to take the GPU producer that kind of spits in the face of Linux and then puts it in everything and then goes, look, it's great, and then the drivers don't work after 2 weeks.
That's a fair point. Yeah, that's a fair point.
And then, lastly, the Asus ROG GL702ZC, which I completely forgot about, but has a Ryzen 1700 and a 580 in it, which is a pretty close contender for the Envy, but battery power, I'm kind of weighing between the two.
Okay. Well, I'll leave it at this, Dahmer. I really appreciate people like you who can dig into some of these hardware things because it is not my strong suit. I like hardware. I like playing with hardware. I can tell you what works well for me, but I'm a terrible use case and I make a terrible hardware review because at the end of the day, well, it turns out that the terminal Thunderbird and Firefox runs on pretty much anything. Again, open phones this hour, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live@AskNoahShow.com. Make your voice heard, become a part of the program. Ray calls us from Oregon. Hey, Ray, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
Noah, thanks for taking my call. I had a question. Several months ago, you did a show about kind of owning your own device and or taking control of your own environment. I've been looking for like a 6 or Sentient screen, this pure Android that I could get. I have a Samsung Galaxy Note 4, and it's kind of dodgy and old, and it doesn't respond, and it's really frustrating dealing with it. I just want to know if you had any suggestions.
Sure. So you were looking for I'm sorry, what was the screen size that would be ideal to you?
6 inch. I'm not a young guy anymore, so started wearing glasses about 6 years ago, so
I got you.
I'm a little bigger and I have huge hands.
I got you. And you're looking for basically as close to stock Android as you can get.
Yep, exactly.
That makes perfect sense. Let me ask you a question. Are you okay installing your own ROM? Would you be comfortable flashing your own operating system onto the phone?
Sure, I rooted this device, so yeah, I'll give it a go. I've done that kind of stuff. Yep.
Great. I've got 2 options for you. The first is Lineage OS, which is pretty much the go-to standard. By default, your battery life will go from like 2 or 3 days, or like a day to like a week. And that's partly because Google Play Services isn't involved. But what's going to happen is you're quickly going to find that maybe a lot of the stuff that you do, you're going to want to use Google Play Services for. And so installing it, they literally give you an APK. You can drop it on there, run it, and it lets you run this APK and actually have Google Play Services installed. So that's a really fantastic way to do that. And the second thing I will give you, or a suggestion to try, is Copperhead OS. See, if you've not heard of Copperhead OS, it is a really great alternative ROM to Android. And Ray, I want to use your point to segue into something real quick. A couple of weeks ago, I got a letter in the mail, and it says, Dear Noah, I tried to load Copper OS onto this phone following the directions from their website. I got an unlocked phone from their supported list, but I ran into many problems. Mainly, I do not speak the magic incantations that are required, and decided it best to hire somebody to do this for me. Almost at the same time, I heard your podcast where you did a review of a different phone with a custom Android firmware, Lineage OS, I believe. About a month, I'm about a month behind the shows. I apologize, but I have watched and read reviews on Copperhead OS, and I want to give it a try, but no review came from somebody I trust as much for you. I would love if you would be able to install Copperhead OS on this phone and use it for as long as you need to do a proper review, and then mail it back to me. Google free. It has an active SIM card through T-Mobile. I've enclosed some money to help pay for the time it takes. Let me know if you need anything or any more money or information. If you do not want the money, please donate it to the Copperhead people for their hard work on their open source project. If you don't have time to do the review, just mail the phone or install the OS, just mail the phone back and donate the rest of the money. And first of all, I want to just say thank you. I take that as a huge compliment when somebody puts that kind of faith or trust in me. And so, Ray, I just want to let you know, we will be doing a review of Copperhead OS thanks to this young lady who sent in her phone at her own cost and funded our techs to be able to actually flash the thing with Copperhead OS. And I think they have that done. I'll double check on it, and we're going to bring that and probably have that review. So keep an eye on the show because we'll have more information coming to you about alternative ROMs. Now, this article comes to us from RedHat.com. I want to dig into this a little bit. Red Hat has reprised its role once more for the newly disclosed speculative store buffer bypass, CVE. Over the course of the past few months, we have further refined our understanding of many of the nuances of speculative execution attacks to develop mitigations for the latest vulnerability while working with vendors under an industry embargo process. We are proud of the countless hours that we invested to make those mitigations available to our customers on a timely basis. Over the coming weeks, we plan to share more technical details as we work with customers to deploy these latest updates. So, and they go into this example, they use this coffee shop example on exactly how this latest vulnerability works. Now, this is really just a variant of the original vulnerability of speculative execution that we covered in depth on the Ask Noah show a couple of months ago. And Red Hat did such a good job. I actually reached out to them and I said, you guys did an amazing job on this video that you put together, and it explains things so clearly, so well. Is that something I would be able to share with my audience? And they said, hey buddy, guess what? Everything we do at this company is open source, and so that video is licensed as Creative Commons, so you are more than welcome to play it, use it in any production, we don't care. So I'm going to let Red Hat actually explain this.
If the news about a computer security threat that lets cyber criminals steal sensitive information through any web browser is giving you déjà vu, you're not alone. Many are comparing this new issue, known as Speculative Store Buffer Bypass, to the Spectre and Meltdown threats in early 2018. And just like when Spectre and Meltdown were announced, software patches are ready to help with this new threat. So what makes Speculative Store Buffer Bypass different? Imagine your computer is a restaurant. Waiters move from table to table writing down orders, called stores, in their ticket booklets. Think of these booklets as memory buffers that allow them to serve several tables more efficiently. At some point, a waiter will go to a shared station to transfer orders from his booklet to his customers' bills. He may decide to print out some bills in advance to have them ready, but to do this, he has to speculate that he's the only one serving his customers. Usually he's right, but sometimes a customer will flag down a different waiter and ask to add something else. Can I get some coffee? The new waiter adds the item to the order, but now the printed bill is incorrect. When it's time to pay, the first waiter double checks and sees that his customer's order no longer matches the printed bill. He throws the old bill out and prints out a new one. A similar process is going on in your actual computer, where processors are like those busy waiters, storing data to and loading data from memory addresses. They are buffering requests and using speculative execution to make sure all this happens as quickly as possible. In order to avoid errors, the processors will double-check if any address used in a load was part of a recent store to that same address. If so, the speculative data gets thrown out, just like our waiter threw out the incorrect bill. The problem is, this speculation occurs in a shared, unsecured area, so it's possible for unauthorized users to see it. This allows an attacker to create a malicious piece of code that fools the processor into reading from one address while it thinks it's reading from somewhere else. By tricking the processor, attackers can steal data, like passwords and credit card numbers, undetected. So how can you protect yourself against a threat that doesn't look like a threat? Technology companies have come together again to create patches that turn off speculative execution for store buffers. This stops unauthorized users from exploiting this vulnerability. It's critical to install these patches right away and stay up to date with the latest releases of operating systems. This will reduce performance slightly for some operations, but not as significantly as the patches for Spectre and Meltdown. Patches will continue to be optimized to reduce the impact on performance even more, and future hardware designs will eliminate this vulnerability altogether. New technology threats aren't deja vu. They're a continuing challenge we all need to deal with. That's why it's essential to keep the lines of communication open among technology companies, communities, and researchers to head off threats before they become huge problems.
Now, I was doing research on this latest vulnerability because, of course, if there's anything you can count on, it's that the Ask Noah show is going to do hours of meticulous research and condense it down into a 1-hour podcast or radio show so that you don't have to do that research but can get the same information. And as I was doing the research, I came across some of the articles that Red Hat had produced, because Red Hat has really been on the leading edge of all of this. And as I was going through some of this and learning about this new vulnerability, this new play on the vulnerability, I came across that video. It was actually sent to me by a Red Hat employee, and I just looked at it and I threw out all the show prep I had for explaining this and thought, I'm just going to let these guys do it because they do it way better than I ever could. And so we'll have that video linked in the show notes if you want to see the visuals that go along with it. Best I can tell, after digging in and doing some research on this, the reason that Intel and AMD are not rushing to ship the patch processors at the hardware level is because there's a lot of security analysts that believe that it is too difficult to actually perform this attack. It's technically possible, the vulnerability technically exists, but it would be very difficult to execute this out and actually yield any results. There's a lot of things that have to be in place for this attack to work out. So it's not quite as severe as something like Heartbleed. And so for that reason, this is nothing really to be terribly alarmed about. Just understand that the companies that make your software, if you're using Red Hat, if you're using Fedora, I'm sure the Canonical folks are doing just as good of a job at keeping up on all this stuff. They are working to keep those systems patched. And so as long as you're staying updated, you're fine. And you can actually go into your processor. You can actually see, I think it's LSCPU will actually tell you if the Spectre and Meltdown patches have been applied. Again, open phones this hour, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. James calls from Idaho. Hey, James, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
Hey, Noah, I've been having virtualization problems. My problem is getting, I know you have other options, so I'll show you what option I'm giving. I'm trying to get Guest Edition installed in Linux on a Linux guest, and it just keeps refusing. Do you have any ideas on what other options I could use? Because I need those functionalities.
Yeah, sure. What Linux distro are you using for the guest?
Well, right now I'm trying to get guests to work on the newest Ubuntu's.
Oh, okay.
Mate, and I was tinkering with KDE, but KDE pissed me off.
Sure, yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, the Ubuntu proper is going to work the best. Now, I'm not exactly sure how you're installing VirtualBox, James, but I just downloaded it off a VirtualBox site, and I'm running the latest version of Ubuntu. I'm running the LTS inside of a VirtualBox, and I had Guest Editions installed just fine for me. So if you're, I have had issues, James, where people will install it from their local repos, and that has had problems. I'm not exactly sure why, but oftentimes they don't carry the latest version. In fact, my wife had an issue where she had installed from the repos rather than downloading from virtualbox.org, and it actually tanked her entire system. It loaded some kernel module or didn't load some kernel module. Whole system tanked. She couldn't even boot. And I tried for about a day to try to fix it, and eventually I just went, you know what? All your stuff's on C file. It's all synced over anyway. It's just easier to reinstall. And she was using Ubuntu GNOME at the time, so she just changed to the Ubuntu proper channel, and that's what she's on now, so she can participate in all of the updates. I want to talk a little bit about what a special episode that we're going to be doing coming up on Saturday, June 9th. A lot of people in the Ask Noah show have divided into, there's two distinct groups. There is the Linux group, the people that like Linux and Linux on the desktop and all of that. And within that Linux group, there is a small new group that has formed, and it's small business owners. And we have a small little group, and we have little meetings and stuff like that. And we chat and hang out and talk about our small business. Most of us are small business owners. Some of people are looking to get into small business. But we just don't really have a passion for it. Now, I am the son of a small business owner. My wife's family owns a small business. I own a small business. So I've always had little things that I have done with small business. And first job was for a small business, for example. And so I'm passionate that way. And so Saturday, June 9th at 1 p.m. Central, that's 11 a.m. Pacific, we are going to be hosting a special edition of the Ask Noah Show, a small business theme hour. If you own a small business, if you work for a small business, if you've dreamed of running a small business, we want to hear from you. So we're going to clear the phone lines off at the top of the hour, and anybody that wants to talk about small business, ask questions about small business, anything at all that relates to small business, that's the hour to do it. Again, that's Saturday, June 9th, 1 p.m. Central. That's 11 a.m. Pacific. We'd love to hear from you. If you can, shoot me an email, live@asknoahshow.com ahead of time. Let me know that you're going to be calling in. That way we just kind of have an idea of who's going to be there. And we're going to have a couple of really cool guests set up for you. I think you're really going to enjoy the episode. So if you don't usually tune in live, that would be a time to do it because you can get your questions answered. Hey, did you know this show is available as a downloadable podcast? To subscribe to the feed or download the latest episode, visit podcast.asknoahshow.com. There you'll find not only the latest episode, but all of the articles and materials referenced in this episode. You can get the latest, of course, by following us on Twitter, @AskNoahShow. There's actually a huge Twitter thing that's going to be coming up next week. The Ask Noah Show continues next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. Huge thanks to Vox Telsus for providing our phone system, Ben, our producer, and Sarah, our call screener. This hour of the show may be over, but there's plenty more content for you 24/7 at AskNoahShow.com.
FM, KEQQ, Grand Forks.
You've accidentally cut your daughter's bangs unevenly. Do you A, line things up a centimeter from her hairline,